Talk about who are the benefactors of this covenant. The beneficiaries of this covenant are said to be not only Noah and his sons, but all their descendants. This word that's translated as descendants, the first primary meaning of that word is seeds. We come from the seed of Noah's family. This covenant, as I said, is different from the one, say, at Mount Sinai, because there it was just between God and Israel through Moses. Now, I want to pull out here something that may be a little interesting. In Acts 15, we have a problem that comes up. The Jewish Christians are trying to impose a Jewish act, circumcision, on the Gentile Christians. Okay? So as the Christian faith had spread to the Gentiles, that was Acts 10, there was a debate about what should be demanded of the Gentile converts. We have what we often call, that's what it's called, the Jerusalem Council. Okay, that's what we call it. They didn't call it that, but that's what we call it. The apostles, along with the elders of the church in Jerusalem, got together to decide what to do. That council was led by James, the half-brother of Jesus. Okay? What happened there? James, it seems, was well respected among the strictest Jews, both Jewish Christians and those who are still practicing Jewish men. And even the strict Jewish population objected when James was murdered later. This is according to Josephus. I've got a little quote here from his book, Antiquities. Okay? It talks about the brother of Jesus, James, and they formed an accusation against James, and they delivered him to be stoned. The citizens didn't like that. They liked James. Now, what did James at this so-called Jerusalem Council, what did they end up doing? When it came to the Gentile converts, the Gentile Christians, James tried not to burden them with the law of Moses. He suggested a few guidelines found in Acts 15, verse 20, and repeated in verse 29. One of those guidelines was to abstain from blood. It's possible that James was referring back to the command that God gave to Noah, his sons, and all their descendants. Now, later on, the Jewish rabbis grouped the Jewish traditions into 7 of what they called the laws of Noah. And they said that these laws were binding on Gentiles. Okay? Remember, Noah is the father of both the Jewish nation through Shem, and he's the father of the Gentile nation through Ham and Japheth. Here are the 7 laws that Jewish rabbis, came up with. Now keep in mind, this is not God, this is Jewish rabbis. By the way, I've got a spelling mistake I'll get to on number 7. Number 1, do not commit adultery. Number 2, do not blaspheme. Do not murder. Number 3, do not steal. Do not commit sexual immorality. Do not eat blood. And it should say do, not do not. I got my too many nots in there. Do set up governments and courts to promote justice. The Jewish rabbis call these the 7 laws for the Gentile nation. James may have been referring to this concept when he and the apostles and the other elders in Jerusalem sent that letter to the Gentile Christians. Now, we're ready for study number 55. Study number 55. The covenant included the animals. We've already mentioned that. He included the animals in His covenant. He's not going to wipe out the world again with a flood. No more flood, no more global flood. In this way, I think God expresses His concern for all His creation. Now, man was made in His image. We're higher than the animal world. But God, you remember when God made the world? What does it say? He looked back and said, that's very good. He looked over all of His creation, and His creation included the animals, and He said, that's very good. You know, God has humor. God was the one that created zebras and giraffes and camels. You've got to have a little humor to make all those different kinds of animals. We see here again the proper balance that the Bible has concerning the environment, concerning our world. Now, God has already allowed man to eat animals. That's added in here to the dominion mandate. But there's also rejection of the idea that animals have no importance of all. You see, this covenant is given to the whole world, human and animal world. Let's go back to Matthew chapter 10. Let's see what Jesus said. Matthew chapter 10, verse 29. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a copper coin? A copper coin was so little, so insignificant. Well, 2 sparrows, they're not even worth very much, are they? And not one of them falls to the ground apart from your Father's will. But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Do not fear, therefore, you are more value than many sparrows. If God knows about His created world, and He does, how much more important are you? Now, why should a Christian want to take care of God's creation? Because we are grateful for what He has given us. Think about the beautiful world that God has given us. You know, God didn't have to give us such a pretty world. You know, God didn't have to give us flowers, but He did. You know, and even though I grew up hating cotton because you had to hoe it and pick it, when it blooms, it's pretty, okay? It's a pretty plant when it blooms. We have an obligation as God's children, God's church, to take care of His creation. God says, never again a global flood. God promises the covenant beneficiaries, Noah, his sons, and their descendants, and the animal world, what He had previously resolved in His own heart. In His own heart, Genesis 8, 21 and 22, He had resolved in His own heart He wouldn't do it again. Was the flood easy on God? No. You think about the darkness that covered the earth during part of the time that Jesus was on the cross, symbolic of the pain that the Heavenly Father was going through having His Son on the cross. This was another one of those tough times for God. God did not take any joy in destroying His creation. That promise is important today. We don't have to fear a global flood. Now, the sign of His covenant. Verse 12. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant which I make between me and you. Once again, God is putting all the responsibility on His shoulders. Between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations. This covenant has not ended. God still has bound Himself with the promise that He will never destroy the earth with a global flood. I set my rainbow in the cloud. Stop right there. That's not exactly what it says in the Hebrew. Yeah, you heard me right. We translate it as rainbow. What God actually said, if you did a straight translation from the Hebrew into the English, here's what it says. I set my bow. The very same word that's used to describe a bow and arrow, a weapon. God said, I set my bow in the cloud. It's interesting that virtually every civilization that I can think of, every early civilization that I can think of, somewhere in their civilization, some of their leaders are pictured with a bow. A bow was a symbol of war, a symbol of power. And God is saying, I'm going to put my bow, my symbol of power, I'm going to put it in the clouds for you. Isn't it interesting that the bow, we call it a rainbow, but it's really that word for bow. Isn't it interesting that bow comes, what? After darkness. You have dark rain clouds come, you have the rain, and then with the light from the heavens, pow, you have the rainbow. Heaven's light shines through a dark world. Now, God has given us a sign here. He says, I set my rainbow in the cloud, and it shall be for the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. It shall be when I bring a cloud over the earth, darkness, that the rainbow, once again, just bow, that the rainbow shall be seen in the cloud, and I will remember my covenant. It's not that God is forgetful. I go into the kitchen, I call out to Lisa, what did I come in here to get? What did I come in here to get here? I forgot, I'm forgetful. It's not that God is forgetful. When it says remembered, what it means is God is once again making it visible. His covenant is visible. I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. The water shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. The rainbow shall be in the cloud. Once again, that's bow in the cloud. And I'll look on it to remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. And God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant which I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth. God provides a sign for His covenant with Noah's family and all living creatures. It's the rainbow. The rainbow is so special. The rainbow is special. We believe that before the flood, that the earth was just water with a mist that came up from the ground. We have no indication that before the flood that it had ever rained, rain coming from the clouds. We believe that the earth was more like a greenhouse, okay, a greenhouse effect. The rains came, we think, for the first time during the flood. Noah and his family had never seen a rainbow. It doesn't seem like God disturbs His laws of nature that He has created. one of his laws of nature is the breaking up of the light. That's what causes the rainbow, the breaking up of the light into its many colors. That's one of his laws of nature. It seems like that rainbow was for the first time after the flood. First time seen by mankind was after the flood. That was his sign of his covenant. Since the rainbow comes from the sun shining forth through the dark clouds, this symbolizes the heavenly pervading the earthly. God is the one who remembers his covenant with mankind through the appearance of the rainbow. Once again, what does that mean? He's proclaiming it again. Hey, I've got a covenant with you. This is my covenant with you. After God made this covenant with Noah and his sons and all their descendants, the narrative's now going to move to some of the early actions of people in the years following the flood. All three of Noah's sons would be involved, plus one grandson. Let's look at study number 56. Noah's sons and the later years. We're up to verse 18 now. Verse number 18, we're just going to barely get into this. After God made his covenant with Noah and his sons, they all seem to live still fairly close to each other over the next years. The narrative moves on to the time by which Noah's youngest son Ham had fathered his youngest son Canaan. That was the fourth son of Ham. Noah took up a possible new occupation for him, tilling the ground. Kind of reminds me of Adam taking care of the garden. He plants a vineyard. Then we see the only lapse by the righteous Noah. He becomes drunk from the wine and fell naked in his tent. Okay? Now, a little bit later we'll talk about why that was wrong. Okay? Now, we're entering into, by the way, if you do have a question, please text me and I'll put it on our questions at the end. We're coming up to a part in the Old Testament that I, as a young boy, just a young guy, I looked at it, I said, God, that's not fair. God, it's not fair that you are going to end up cursing Canaan. Ham was the one that did it. Ham was the one that did it. So why does Canaan end up being cursed? It's not clear in the English, but it is extremely clear in the Hebrew. Ham is going to go into his father's tent, and Ham is going to look upon his father's shame. We'll talk more about this, Lord willing, on Sunday. And what does Ham do? He rejoiced in it. Ha, ha, ha. I've caught, good old Noah. Everyone thinks Noah's so good. Ha, ha, ha. Look at that. That's what he does. He rejoices in his father's sin. Why does he rejoice in his father's sin? Most likely because Ham was a big-time sinner himself. We're not going to get to all of that tonight. We're going to be running out of time. On Sunday, I will explain what it comes out in the Hebrew. We'll talk about what Ham did, why it was wrong. Well, first of all, we're going to talk about what Noah did, why that was wrong. Then we'll talk about what Ham did and why that was wrong. And then I'll give you the 3 reasons why Noah cursed Canaan and not Ham. And I'm going to go ahead and give you one of the 3. Okay? I'll go ahead and give you one of the 3 tonight. One reason why Noah cursed Canaan and not Ham is found in verse 1 here. Go back to verse 1. So God blessed Noah and his sons. Noah could not undo what God had already done. God had already blessed Ham. Noah can't undo that blessing. He can't reverse it. So then he turns and curses his son. And to understand why he curses his son, you got to know the two other reasons, okay? So come back Sunday morning, you'll find out the two other reasons. Okay, there's three reasons why he does it. First reason, I've already given you. He can't undo God's blessing. He can't say, well, Ham, I'm sorry, God blessed you, but I'm going to reverse it. He can't do that. The two other reasons is going to explain why it went down to Canaan. Why Canaan bore the price, bore the responsibility. Let's go ahead and look here. And right now I don't have any questions. Okay. Unlike Ham, the brothers, Shem and Japheth, acted in an honorable way. They walked backwards and covered their father Noah with a robe. In fact, the word here refers to that outer garment that men would wear, that they would wrap around them. They would use it as a blanket at night. They covered their father with a robe. Ever since Adam and Eve in the garden, being naked was regarded as being shameful. Being naked in public was regarded as being shameful. Even though Noah was inside his tent, this was still shameful. So they cover their father with that robe, but they do so without looking. They walk backwards and don't look. As a result, Noah cursed Canaan, and he blessed Shem and Japheth. I've already mentioned to you that Shem's descendants are going to be the Jewish nation. From Shem, we're going to have the Jewish nation. From Japheth, we're going to have all the nations of Europe. We're going to have also the Persians. We're going to have the Russians and the Chinese coming from Japheth. Japheth is going to, as Noah says, will be enlarged. Well, it was enlarged. You know, his descendants take over the world. Okay, they spread out. They really do. The reason for the curse in Canaan, we will talk about that come Sunday morning. Come Sunday morning, we'll look at verse 18 and 19. We'll talk about the fact that it seems like Noah didn't have any more sons after the flood. Now, Noah is going to be the third oldest living person to ever walk this earth. He's the third oldest, okay? Only two people were older than him when they died. Figure out who the two were, okay? Noah lives to be 950. You know one, Methuselah, who's the other guy, okay? So you do a little research. We're going to be looking at their descendants and what their descendants end up doing. And also, Sunday morning, I'm going to give you a timeline, okay? And it's interesting. Abraham, I said to you that Shem, okay, Shem was the descendant or the ancestor for the Jewish people. You're going to see how Abraham could have known virtually everybody from Noah down. We'll talk about that when we talk about the timeline. That is it. We're going to stop right there. That's where we'll begin, Lord willing, on Sunday morning. Let me make sure there's no questions. And no questions. I have a question from one of my couples, but I'll take that later on. So that's it. Appreciate it so much. You are dismissed. And if you want, the next two lessons are up here in the front.